It is Thursday, April 14th, and you're watching Red on Q College Sports. Welcome. Thanks for checking us out again. You are watching Red on Q College Sports, and I'm your host, Tyson Quiller. Feel free to like, subscribe. Please share this content with anyone you think might find it interesting. Today we're going to take a kind of a 30,000-foot view of the offseason for the Colorado Buffaloes football team. We're going to look at each position group and assign a letter grade to them based off of the activity that's taken place since the end of the season. Coaches that have been fired, new coaches added to the staff, players who've gone out in the transfer portal or come in, and obviously recruiting activity as well. And that should hopefully give us a better idea of what we can expect coming up here in a couple of weeks at the spring game. Going to be honest with you, the cupboard is a little bit bare, and it's kind of a make or break season, I think, for head coach Karl Dorrell. But before we get into that, I want to start here. Some very, very tragic, sad news that hit the sports world over this past weekend. It's kind of opened up a couple of topics that I think are really important that people are now discussing. And so let's just go ahead and start right there. Former Ohio State quarterback and current NFL quarterback Dwayne Haskins died over the weekend, reportedly struck by a vehicle while attempting to cross an interstate on foot. Palm Beach, Florida police issued the following statement with regards to this situation. The identity of the 24-year-old male is Dwayne Haskins Jr., date of birth May 3rd, 1997. He was going to be turning 25 years old in less than a month. For the quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mr. Haskins was walking on a limited access facility, highway expressway, for unknown reasons. He was attempting to cross the westbound lanes of the Interstate 595 when there was oncoming traffic. Unfortunately, he collided with oncoming dump truck. Mr. Haskins was pronounced dead on the scene. This is an open traffic homicide investigation. No further information is being released at this time while the investigation is pending. Now, Dwayne Haskins was a sensational player at Ohio State. In college, in his sophomore season, he threw for 4,831 yards, 50 touchdowns, and just 8 interceptions. That's a fantastic, unbelievable stat line there, as he led the Buckeyes to a 13-1 record and a number 3 finish in the final AP Top 25 polls in Urban Meyer's last season as head coach. Now, he left college for the NFL after that sophomore season. He was drafted number 15 overall by Washington, and he began his NFL career. He played 2 seasons of football in Washington, and then this past offseason in 2021, he was moved in free agency over to Pittsburgh. The sports world is obviously in shock at this news. His current coach, Mike Tomlin, had this to say: "I am devastated and at a loss for words with the unfortunate passing of Dwayne Haskins. He quickly became part of our Steelers family upon his arrival in Pittsburgh and was one of the hardest working players on the team, both on the field and in our community. Dwayne was a great teammate, but even more so a tremendous friend to so many. I'm truly heartbroken. Our thoughts and prayers are with his wife, Calabria, and the entire family during this difficult time." Now, his wife, his widow, Calabria, released this statement just yesterday. "My husband was more than a great football player. He had a smile of a rainbow. He will forever rest and remain in our hearts till the end of time. His eternal love will always reside with us. Peace, love of my life forever. Rest in the beautiful peace of heaven." Now, Haskins was in Florida at this time with teammates. A lot of people are sort of wondering, like, why was he in Florida? It's not because he was partying or doing whatever, traveling with family or whatever in the off season. Basically, because of some of the rules in the collective bargaining agreement, there are limited practice windows in the off season in the NFL. So you'll oftentimes see quarterbacks and wide receivers, or just different position groups, who will travel to kind of sunny, warm weather destinations during the off season for a couple of reasons. One, for bonding for new players that came in free agency or were drafted or were traded. And then also to sort of get some reps in shorts and shirts, throwing passes, receivers catching balls. This is very, very common. That's why Dwayne Haskins was in Florida at the time. This is just terribly tragic news. It just breaks your heart. But the story has brought to light so many other major topics that are now being sort of coming to the surface in the public discourse, and that I think are important. And I think there is good coming out of this. One being Adam Schefter, one of those topics being Adam Schefter, who broke the news. He's an ESPN insider. That's his job. He gets the news first. He breaks the news about trades, about all kinds of different things, contract negotiations, etc. Now, when Schefter broke this news, he talked about the circumstances leading to Dwayne Haskins' death, but he kind of couched it in a narrative that people have found to be a little bit distasteful. Now, if you are breaking news like Adam Schefter does, I mean, there's a couple of things you need to do for your audience. Number one, I mean, you have to kind of establish, like, why is it that the public should care more about this death than the thousands of other people that died in this country over the weekend. So I totally understand that. That's part of being an investigator. That's part of journalism. So number one, obviously, he's 24 years old. Young people, it's very rare that young people die at that age, and so that's obviously shocking. But number two, I mean, he's a public figure. He is a celebrity of sorts, a professional athlete, and so I understand why Adam Schefter felt the need to kind of explain, like, why is this noteworthy, right? But that brought us kind of into the world of a narrative that's been kind of following Dwayne Haskins for a little while now. I'm in the process of putting together another kind of evergreen show, and it's going to be looking at kind of some of the biggest college football stars that busted in the NFL, and maybe some of the college football stars that were drafted super late in the draft and ended up being phenomenal in the NFL. And one name I came across multiple times was Dwayne Haskins. People left and right are calling Dwayne Haskins a bust. I mean, he's been in the league 3 years. He was still in the league. He was still a professional quarterback. I don't think it's correct to put him in the class of Ryan Leaf or Jamarcus Russell just yet, because he's still active in his career. I mean, what happens if he takes the Pittsburgh Steelers to the AFC Championship, this coming year, had he not passed, then that would clearly take him out of the bust category. So that's just something that I think is maybe not entirely fair to the athletes. This kind of real time, as it's happening, is LeBron better than Jordan? As it's happening, and then we feel like we've got to draw some line of demarcation. Well, if LeBron exceeds this, then he's better than Jordan. I think let the career play out, and then we'll line up the numbers, and then we'll line up the successes and the failures, and then we can have that debate and that decision afterwards. But I understand in our business, you need content, and so I get it. Number two topic that I want to talk about, though, is coping with the loss, or just kind of a public persona in general. There is kind of this culture developing in the sports world about sort of emoting publicly. And what I mean by that is, for example, Kyler Murray was kind of beefing with the Arizona Cardinals, and so what he does is he clears everything Arizona Cardinals related off of his social media, and that was kind of like an emotional statement to the public, like, I'm upset with the Cardinals. Things like this, most recently having to do with Chase Claypool, who was is currently a wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. In the time, less than a year that he was playing with Dwayne Haskins, clearly developed a very strong friendship with him. And the very next day after the news comes out, he's posting a video of himself on Instagram and Facebook, crying, and saying he's being vulnerable. And as somebody who has dealt with a lot of loss of very close friends at a young age, I totally understand how emotions can overcome you. And there's a coping process that you go through when you have a loss as tragic and dramatic as that. I don't think it's the most healthy thing to do to record yourself and put that on the internet when you are at your most vulnerable. Now, after the fact, I totally understand as a professional wanting to encourage others to be vulnerable with their families, vulnerable with their friend groups, with their spouses. That is healthy, but I think maybe the better way to handle that is after the fact to speak publicly about how you were vulnerable rather than recording yourself crying, bawling your eyes out the very next day, as Dwayne Haskins has yet to even be buried in the ground. It just felt very cringy and uncomfortable, and I think maybe more people need to talk about, hey, when these events happen, you need to surround yourself with the ones that you love. You need to surround yourself with a strong friend group, strong family group, and process through this together. You don't need to be bringing Tyson in to have some critique or to view your processing. Process it. It's very personal. It should be very personal. Not everything that you think or feel immediately needs to be put out onto the internet for everyone to see, because another reason is when we are at our most vulnerable, and again, I've been there, believe me, multiple times I've been there. When you are at your most vulnerable, you are not always the most rational and logical person. Oftentimes, especially if you have somebody close that commits suicide, you're thinking, what could I have done differently? Did I say something that triggered this off? I could have been there. There's a lot of self-blame that you go through, and that's all stuff that you don't need to be putting on the internet for people to then point back at and say, well, maybe it was your fault. Maybe it would. You understand what I'm saying? So I just think that that's a topic that maybe we need to discuss a little bit further. I don't claim to be an expert on that, and I certainly welcome any of your feedback on that, suggestions. That's just kind of what I was thinking and feeling as I was kind of walking through this aspect of the story. I discussed this concept of being a football flop. I think it was really unfair to tag that on Dwayne Haskins. And even after the fact, I went and looked at a number of his statistics, and he did make a lot of money. And so I think maybe that's why people think that he didn't perform to the level he should have. But he was drafted number 15 overall. He wasn't a first overall draft pick, and he actually won a number of games. But he was a young man, and he made some mistakes. He kind of got on the wrong side of the media with a number of topics and issues, and boy, they just hammered him on that. And so now it's kind of interesting to watch them all trying to completely switch angles on Dwayne Haskins. With that being said, overarching, for any of you that are out there watching, man, tell the people you love that you love them today. Be with the people that matter to you. Be with the people that you care about, and let them know how you feel, because, man, we're not guaranteed tomorrow. And do so in person. Don't do so in a video on Instagram or post on Instagram or Facebook. Okay, be human, be personable, and that sort of walks us into the last topic or angle of this I want to talk about. And this is personally convicting for me. Obviously, I can be very severe at times in my critiques, but the reality is these are human beings. Somebody I'm often critical of, Darren Chiaverini, or the Colorado Athletic Director Rick George, or LeBron James, or whomever. It is entirely fair to critique their actions, what they say, their performance, but always remember these are human beings. Okay, and they feel, they hurt, they emote, they regret, just the same as we all do. And so I think that this is a good opportunity to remind ourselves of that, especially as so many people in the sports world, talking heads, make careers out of these bombastic, inflammatory, really critical, and oftentimes personally critical statements and claims. I think it's important to remind ourselves, these are human beings. And oftentimes in the case of the athletes, they are 22, 23, 24, 25. I am very, very glad that what I did at that age was not recorded, was not critiqued by the media, because I certainly made my fair share of mistakes as well. So with all that being said, Dwayne Haskins Jr. Was just 24 years old. Okay, so let's dive into Colorado Buffalo football. It's kind of the spring off-season activity and our letter grades. I want to let you know that the resources I use, Our Lads, is a very awesome, in real time kind of update for rosters. and depth charts. So I want to encourage you to check out our lads. Obviously, Sports Reference, I get a ton of information and statistics from them. If you guys would like for me to come out with kind of a comprehensive list of all the references I use as I collect all this information, I'd be more than happy to put that out for you. But let's go ahead and start with the most pressing issue or concern when it comes to the Colorado Buffaloes. Who is the quarterback? So last season, the Buffaloes averaged just 131.3 pass yards per game. That was fourth worst in the country. Their leading receiver was tight end Brady Russell, if that makes any sense to you. They averaged just 5.9 yards per completion, which is pathetic. That means that every pass that was complete was very, very short, just a little bit more than halfway to the first down marker. They had 5 games last year passing less than 100 yards. Really anemic. We talked about this a lot last year. So in the offseason, they fired the offensive line coach Mitch Rodriguez. Then after the season, they fired the offensive coordinator Darren Cheverini. In my opinion, that was too little too late. In comes new offensive coordinator Mike Sanford. In his 2 years at Minnesota, his Gophers passed for just 29 yards per game more than did the Buffaloes. He does not have some expansive experience of a much better passing performance. Last year, Minnesota was 13th worst in the country in passing offense. So you'll have to pardon me if I'm a little skeptical of this being some dramatic upgrade. The current depth chart, you have J.T. Shrout, the junior transfer from Tennessee, coming off of that injury to the knee in last offseason. He's been practicing in the spring, but on a limited basis. Second on your depth chart is Brendan Lewis, the sophomore who started last year. And then third, you have Maddox Kopp, the redshirt freshman who transferred in from Houston. You also have, as by way of recruiting, a 3-star Owen McCown, who's 6'1", 175. He, I think, is going to need some development. He looks pretty raw and pretty small. He needs to hit the weight room as well. The position group rank that I have for the Buffaloes at quarterback at this time is a D, especially because J.T. Shrout is still practicing on a limited basis. Brendan Lewis, if the season were to start today, he would be the starter. I don't see some dramatic upturn in his performance or play. So our quarterback position group is a D at this time. Here's a little bit more information from CUBuffs.com. As Coach Sanford is trying to implement his new offense, he has been limited in what he can do because of a lack of depth in certain position groups. There are only 6 receivers that are practicing this spring, and the Buffs have only 3 scholarship running backs. Here's what Darrell had to say: "I'm concerned about our depth. We probably have to slow down the pace so that we're getting really quality reps instead of quantity." Now I gotta say, Darren Cheverini just completely decimated this offense. And now we have a new offensive coordinator who has proven to be mediocre at best, trying to pick up the pieces. By the way, this has all happened in the last 2 years under Carl Durrell's nose. I think he absolutely should be firmly on the hot seat coming into this year. I hope, obviously, that with some young talent and some new scheming, that maybe they can perform better than what I think that they're going to do this season. And then we have to move over to the discussion about replacing the linebackers. Obviously, all-world linebacker Nate Landman is gone. Carson Wells, who was a fantastic linebacker, is gone as well. Massive shoes to fill in the box. Landman finished his career with 348 tackles and 10 sacks. He had 2 seasons over 100 tackles, just a stud. And then, obviously, you also lose the senior linebacker Jack Lamb, who medically retired in kind of a weird situation there. Your current depth chart at Sam linebacker Robert Barnes comes back. He transferred in last year from Oklahoma. Last season he had 41 tackles, an interception, and 1 fumble recovery. At Mike linebacker Quinn Perry, who is really kind of coming into his own, he is kind of pegged to be the next Carson Wells, the next Nate Landman, kind of a upperclassman who has been developing and progressing and playing better year after year. He had 64 tackles in 2020. At outside linebacker, Devin Grant, redshirt freshman, had 13 tackles in just 3 games of play last year. And then at your other Sam linebacker, you have Marvin Ham, the second, who's a redshirt sophomore. He had 19 tackles in 5 games last season. Now, when we look at our position group rank, the Buffaloes brought in 0 linebackers from the portal. They do have, though, 5 3-star linebackers coming in by way of recruiting. I think this is maybe one of the stronger groups, if you believe it or not, on the Buffs coming out of the spring practices here. Position group, I give them a B. Carl Burrell said the communication on defense has been really impressive. And here's his quote: "That was as good as I've ever seen and heard out of the linebacking group." Now let's move to the wide receiver group, which was really decimated by the transfer portal. Let's start maybe talking about transfer portal in general. The Buffs had over 20 scholarship players leave via the transfer portal. And like I just mentioned, the wide receiver group was one of the bigger losses. Brendan Rice goes to USC. He had 21 receptions for 299 yards, 3 touchdowns last year. Dimitri Stanley transfers to Iowa State. Levante Chenal transfers to Alabama State. Chris Carpenter transfers to UT San Antonio. Just decimated this position group. You do bring in the grad transfer from Baylor, RJ Sneed, who I've heard has been very impressive at spring practices. He had 46 receptions for 573 yards last season for Baylor. You also bring in 2 3-star recruits out of Texas. I think this position group can get to a point to where they are solid, but there's too many uncertainties right now, and you lost so much talent in the transfer portal. It's a C- on this position group, but it's kind of irrelevant unless you can establish a quarterback who can throw the ball. Now, how about the defensive secondary that also got completely decimated by the transfer portal? Christian Gonzalez transfers to Oregon, had 53 tackles last year. Mark Perry to TCU, had 66 tackles and 3 interceptions last season. And Mekhi Blackman transfers to USC. I mean, those are 3 of your starting 4 in your secondary, all transferred out. 2 of them transferred to teams in our own conference. Okay? I mean, this position group just got dismantled. Isaiah Lewis is back for his senior season, though, and he led the Buffs in tackles at 68 last season. Again, this is a mantra I'm continuing, and it's so frustrating. The Buffs added no defensive backs through the transfer portal. They did do some work in the recruiting trail for the secondary. They added 4 cornerbacks and 3 safeties. This is a position group that, again, same thing as the wide receiver group. Young, undefined. We'll see what they can develop into. I got to go with a position group rank of a C for this offseason. And in keeping with our topic of position groups that just got dismantled this spring, how about the running back group? Jarek Broussard, our all-world running back, transfers to Michigan State. Then Ashad Clayton, who was kind of an up-and-coming, promising running back, transfers to Tulane. Now, Alex Fontenot is back, and he rushed for almost 900 yards in 2019. Early last year, he was a Doak Walker watch list guy. If you remember the games from last season, though, the Buffs had no credibility in the passing game. And so, basically, starting in the game against Minnesota, the defenses would just stack the box and stop the run. And they would go straight up man coverage in the passing game and dare us to pass. We never passed, and even when we did, it was erratic, terrible, wide passing. And so the running game just got completely stifled out of the jump there. You do bring in a grad transfer, Ramon Jefferson, out of Sam Houston. I have heard he has been playing very well in the spring practices as well. He had 2 seasons over 1,000 yards rushing and 13 touchdowns at Sam Houston. You only bring in 1 running back as a recruit, the 3-star Victor Venn from Buford, Georgia. I've heard good things about him. He may get a little playtime this season after, obviously, Alex Fontenot and Ramon Jefferson. You have 3 upperclassmen on the offensive line, and then in comes the 6'7", 309-pound transfer, right tackle, Tommy Brown from Alabama. That is a massive upgrade. That's going to be huge in the running game. It's also going to be huge for pass protect. I think this group did a decent job of reloading after losing Jarek Broussard. I give this position group a B-. So I will just finish up this episode right here. Should things go sideways, obviously those of you who've been listening to me on the Fan Section podcast, which I highly recommend you checking out on Spotify. Alan does a great job over there. And then obviously my episodes here on Right on Cue College Sports is the way Colorado handled releasing the offensive coordinator Darren Cheverini last year. I thought was totally inept. It totally screwed us coming into spring here, and we're obviously reaping the rewards of that. when it's abundantly clear in the middle of a season that a coach needs to go, you need to fire them. They have to go. They have to go. And you need to begin the search. And your replacement has to be a better replacement than a coach who just got fired by Minnesota. Okay, so should things go sideways here, Colorado, if you want to be a credible program, if you want a chance to have a winning season at any point in the next 5 years, you need to be serious about this. So here's kind of the revenue picture. The average annual revenue at Colorado, adjusted for COVID drop-offs, is almost $70 million. Again, this is just the football program per year. Now, this is going to make some people raw, but I'm going here. Michigan State football brings in annually almost $76 million a year. So that's almost the same annual football revenue. Colorado paid Mel Tucker $2.4 million a year and just lost him to Michigan State, who paid him $5.5 million a year initially, and then now they're paying him $9.5 million a year to lock him down, as after this current season was coming to a close, teams like LSU, USC were really trying to pry him away from Michigan State. Michigan State locked him down with that $9.5 million a year contract. The Buffs are paying Durrell currently $3.6 million per year right now. Here's kind of a look at some of our past coaches. McIntyre was paid $1.5 million a year. John Embry was paid $1 million a year. Dan Hawkins $1.5 million a year. The Buffs start the season off hosting TCU, then they're at Air Force and at Minnesota. They then host UCLA and are at Arizona. If they don't win 2 of those 5 games, if they start 1-4 or God forbid 0-5, I think you have to move on from Durrell. You have to. And if that's the case, then it's time for the Buffs to get in the game. They need to start the search immediately. They need to be willing to pay their next coach $5 million a year or more. Okay? Within our own conference, USC gave Lincoln Riley a deal for $10 million per year. Stanford's David Shaw gets paid $9 million per year. UCLA pays Chip Kelly $5.5 million a year. Oregon just hired Georgia defensive coordinator Dan Lanning, who's entirely unproven as a head coach, and they're paying him $4.9 million a year. Arizona State pays Herm Edwards $4 million a year. Washington just hired Kalen DeBauer, who is a brand new newbie, barely getting his feet under him as a Division I college football coach, and they're paying him $3.5 million a year. There are 35 coaches that are paid $5 million a year or more. 51 coaches are paid $4 million a year or more in Division I FBS football. Colorado needs to be in that. They need to be in that. So if we are looking at potential replacements, I want to throw out some names that need to be looked at should this take place. Obviously, I am hoping Karl Dorrell is able to get this group to rally together and they're able to have an inspired season. But if you start off 1-4 or 0-5, he must be released at that point. You have to move on from him. So here's some names that I think you want to look at, and some of these are people who have ties to Colorado, but some of them are great coaches that are just flat underpaid. If you came at them with $5 million a year, it would possibly be so overwhelmingly an increase in pay that they would be willing to entertain the option. First, obviously, Luke Fickell at Cincinnati. The only place people have discussed that he would maybe want to coach at other than Cincinnati is Ohio State, where he played his football. But that role is filled by Ryan Day, and Ryan Day is not going anywhere. So for Luke Fickell, after going just 4-8 in his first season at Cincinnati, he's averaging 11-2 record in each of the last 4 seasons. His Bearcats were, obviously, as we know, the first group of 5 team to break the glass ceiling into the college football playoff this last season. And this team right now is going through a major turmoil and turnover. They lost an absolute ton in this past offseason. I think he might be looking for options to get out of there. Cincinnati pays Fickell just $3 million a year. You come in and you say, we're going to almost double that, $5 million. I think he'd be willing to entertain it. How about Pat Narduzzi at Pittsburgh? In his 7 years at the helm, they have an average record of 9-4. This season was obviously a breakout season for them. We'll see if he can duplicate it this upcoming season. But Pittsburgh is paying Narduzzi $4 million a year. And I know this one gets bandied about, but Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs, the 3rd all-time single-season rusher in Colorado Buffalo history. In 1990, he led the nation in rushing and received consensus All-American honors. He and the Buffaloes, led by Bill McCartney, won the national championship that year. He was the Buffs running backs coach under Gary Barnett in 2002 and 2003, and coached the likes of Bobby Purify, Marcus Houston, and Chris Brown. He clearly has a long and storied history and standing ties to the CU Buffs. Kansas City currently pays Eric Bieniemy just $600,000 a year. Now, we don't know how he would do as a head coach, but he would certainly get the offense turned around. I think you have to make an offer to him, $4 or $5 million. You have to do it. Now, here's a couple names I'm going to brush through pretty quickly. Matt Rule, the Carolina Panthers head coach. In just 3 years at Baylor, Rule took a 1-11 Baylor Bears squad team and turned them into 11-3. The Panthers are currently paying Rule $8.9 million a year, which you can't compete with, and I understand that. But there's a lot of talk that he may be out of a job coming up at the end of the season. He would certainly be interested in entertaining coming back to the college level. How about Art Briles, who's currently coaching high school and Italian football? Now, obviously, there's a lot of drama related to this, and Colorado would maybe never hire him because of that, but he's also an older coach, 66, but he revolutionized the game with RG3 at Baylor. They won 10 or more games in 4 of his last 5 seasons at Baylor. For reference, the Buffs have had one 10-win season in the last 20 years. And the Buffs have had 4 10-plus loss seasons in that stint. Art Briles is currently splitting time coaching professional Italian football and high school in Texas. His Texas ties are deep. That would give the Buffs a really solid recruiting advantage. He has vocalized a great deal of interest in coaching college football again recently. The big problem here, like I mentioned, is that Art Briles went through kind of the same allegations as did Gary Barnett a decade earlier. I think Bowler would never go for this hire. And capping off our 3 Baylor head coaches roundup, we have Dave Aranda. He's only 45 years old, really up and coming. He was defense coordinator at Wisconsin and then at LSU, where they won the national championship. In 2 seasons at Baylor, he is 14-9. His Bears finished ranked number 5 in the country this last season. Baylor is paying Dave Aranda $4 million a year. I think you might be able to find some interest if you come at him with 5. How about this one? Les Miles. Now, he's currently retired, 68 years old. He was with the Buffaloes as offensive line coach from 1982 to 86. He was a long tenured assistant to Bill McCartney, dating back to Michigan. Kansas was, at the time, just paying Les Miles $2.775 million. You might be able to get in and get him at a steal, $2.5 million, $3 million, and I'm sure he would be interested. How about this one? Brady Hoke, San Diego State. Now, he is 63 years old, and he really kind of burned out at Michigan. But in just his second year back coaching the Aztecs, they went 12-2, and he finished in the top 25. San Diego State is paying Hoke just $1.25 million a year. Now, he may not want to leave from the school that put him on the map, but it's worth a try. You got to try. See, this is the mentality and the mindset you have to have, is we're going to make them tell us no. Okay, you don't go out there saying, oh, they're out of our league. If you want to be credible, if you want to compete in the Pac-12, which is very down, Pac-12 is very, very winnable right now. Utah won it last year. Okay, Utah has way less revenue than Colorado does. Utah never out-recruits Colorado. Okay, like Utah won this conference. Colorado can win this conference if you go out and you pursue players and you pursue coaches that are above the level you think. And you know what? Most of them may say no, but some will say yes, and they'll come. I think a positive indication that is a change in mentality is bringing in Tommy Brown, the right tackle from Alabama. That was a huge transfer portal get, and we need to keep going with that. So let's take a look at our schedule here before we let you go. Start the season off with TCU at home. TCU is in a bit of disarray. They had a ton of player turnover. They fired Gary Patterson last year. This is a team that we have an opportunity to win. Beat TCU in the opening game. That could springboard you into some success moving forward. Then you're at Air Force. Air Force is a very good team. Troy Calhoun is a fantastic coach. That game is very losable. You may look at the schedule and say, oh, we'll beat Air Force. No, we could very much lose that game. We did lose to Air Force just a couple years ago, okay? So you need to be on your game, but that would be a good win if they could pull that off. Then you're at Minnesota. That's one of the tougher games on the front half of the schedule. Although I think Minnesota is not any world beater either, okay? They won 8 games last year. They look like world beaters when they played the Buffs, but that's because the Buffs played absolutely terrible football that game. Then you have UCLA at home. Now, UCLA is probably going to be the best team in the Pac-12 South, but you get them at home. That one, maybe a reach to say we could maybe win that one. Then you're at Arizona. Not a lot of people are aware. Arizona was one of the best performing teams in the transfer portal this offseason. They've been very active. They also recruited very well. Arizona is going to be much better than they were last year. Jed Fish, in year 2 as the head coach, is really turning that program around. Buffs better be on their game because you could get nipped right there at Arizona. Then you got Cal at home at Oregon State. These are 2 teams that are good, not great. I think they're both winnable games, but again, they're both very losable games. Then you got Arizona State at home. Arizona State is a program that I could see taking a real nosedive this season. They've had a ton of drama in the program, a ton of uncertainty. Jaden Daniels, their quarterback, transferred out in the transfer portal. I think you could see Arizona, who won 8 games this season, drop off a cliff and be down towards the 3-4 wins next season. So that should be a game that the Buffs win there at home. Then you get Oregon at home. Probably unlikely to think that you would win that one. Your 2 toughest games on the schedule, your 3 toughest games on the schedule this season are all at home. UCLA at home, Oregon at home, and then on November 26th, you get Utah at home. Probably fair to say those are all losses. I wouldn't hold that against Carl Durrell, but there's an awful lot of wins to be had here in the schedule. You finish off, your last 4 games are just very, very difficult. This is why I say you cannot start 1-4, you cannot start 0-5, because you're most likely going to lose all 4 of your last 4 games. Oregon at home, at USC, at Washington, Utah at home. USC and Washington are going to be much better. USC, I think, is overhyped, but they will be better than last season. So that'll wrap it up for us. Obviously, some encouraging stuff, some discouraging stuff. Hopeful, as always, for the upcoming college football season for the Buffaloes. I want to harken back to the story about Dwayne Haskins and just say, hey, reach out to somebody you haven't talked to in a while. The friends, family, we get caught up in kind of the day-to-day, and we forget to reach out to people. And we're not guaranteed tomorrow, man. Life is fickle. Life is short. Do something each week that's bigger than yourself. Do something each week for somebody else. Something that lasts beyond yourself. Should tomorrow be your day. And on that somber note, I want to thank you for checking out Right on Cue Sports. I'm your host, Tyson Quiller, and we will get at you next time.